Good morning, everyone. So this morning I'm going to give a talk that I've titled, What's Going On? And the title of the talk is, I swiped it from Marvin Gaye. It's a title of his masterful 1971 album. And of course, that title track, such a beautiful song and very well known and really considered to be one of the greatest pop songs of the past 50 years. And as I was writing this talk, I looked up a little bit about the song, and I learned that the kernel of the song, the first draft of the song, if you will, which was written by Ronaldo Benson of the Four Tops, that great pop band, Motown pop band. And he wrote this song in response to police brutality that he witnessed at a Vietnam War protest. It was in Berkeley, California. It was a particularly vicious protest that day. I think it was known after that as Bloody Sunday. And so he wrote this song in response to what it was that he'd seen. And then when he brought it to Marvin Gaye reworked the song pretty fully, actually. He rewrote the melody and changed some of the lyrics. And Gaye himself, when he was reworking the song, was inspired by his own response to the Watts riots of 1965, after which he said something on the order of, how can I keep singing, the kinds of songs that I'm singing when this is what's going on in the world. And he also was responding as well to the events in Vietnam. And it just seemed to me that that song is especially resonant right now, particularly in the Twin Cities, as we're heading toward the end of the Derek Chauvin trial, the white police officer who was accused of killing George Floyd. And tensions are a little high. I was out walking around downtown St. Paul yesterday and ended up toward the Capitol. And the building is surrounded by chain link fence, and there are armed guards, at least when I was there, sitting out in front, helicopter hovering over, circling the Capitol. And then, of course, there's a recent killing of Dante Wright in Brooklyn Center on April 11th. And of course, this is in the context of the Derek Chauvin trial. And there's been unrest again here in the Twin Cities over that, understandably so. And of course, then this just links us to all the deaths of African Americans, especially Black men, at the hands of police across the United States. So this song, What's Going On, just seems to be very resonant to the moment. When Benson originally wrote the song, he said he presented it to the Four Tops, and they turned it down because they said it was a protest song, and they didn't record protest songs. And Benson tried to persuade them to record it. He said, no, man, it's a love song about love and understanding. I'm not protesting. I want to know what's going on. And I love that response. He's not protesting. He just wants to know what's going on. That's a great question. To look at the world, to see and feel the suffering of this world, and to stop and ask, what's going on? What's going on? And that question, at that level that Benson is pointing to there, to me, it's a question that's resonant with our practice, and resonant with our practice in a way that I think illuminates some of the current events that perhaps give us pause and provoke us to ask what's going on. Our practice, in a way, can be characterized as just that, asking that question right now, just now, and asking what's going on. Now, that's a way we can see our practice, just asking what's going on. What is this? What? It's important to me that the question that Benson posed and the question that we're asking is not why. That's our standard question that we ask is, why is this happening? It's the question that you might often get from children. Why is this like this? And then perhaps, I see some parents smiling out there, and perhaps then you make the mistake of stepping into it and you start explaining why things are the way they are. And you know, the next question is, well, why that, right? And you just keep taking it until you finally get to the point where you say, because I said so. At least I remember my mom saying that, right? So that's the thing with these why questions, you keep spinning out to more and more of these answers. What is just what? If we just ask what, it's just this question, what? Of course, our tendency, just as with the why questions, is that we have this, we just want to fill that what in with something. We can't just say what. What is this? What's going on? We have to then answer it. And this is a great problem for us, or it can be a great problem for us. So we ask, well, what's going on? Well, this is what's going on. This is what's going on. And maybe we can take it a step further and we say, this is going on because of this and because of that. And in and of itself, that's not a problem, right? To answer that question. It's just we have a tendency to answer that, what's going on, what, with answers. And the problem is with those answers, if we take those answers to be true. So once we've answered the question, what's going on? And we say, well, it's this, and it's this because of that. Then we take our answers to be true. Now, I do understand that sometimes when we answer those questions, they can be helpful and they can guide us. I recently was listening to, I have to look at his name here, Scott Weidensaul. I was listening to him on Fresh Air, the NPR show hosted by Terry Gross. And Scott Weidensaul is a writer and a naturalist, and he does field work studying migratory birds. And as you probably have encountered over the course of my talks and the letters that I've been writing, I'm interested in birds. And so there was, to me, it was an interesting interview. And one of the things that Weidensaul said was really interesting is that he was talking about the rebound in wetland birds, in wetland bird populations. And, once he said that, I was just thinking of my own experiences, how I've seen proliferation of herons and egrets and the variety of ducks that I see in my neighborhood. Now, my neighborhood is kind of a special neighborhood in a way because we have a nature center that's just down the street from me, literally like 2 blocks away. So I have an opportunity. There's a place right by my house where animals are welcome to live without too much concern. Deer, coyote, fox, all kinds of birds. But I see this rebound in the wetland birds. And he was saying that one of the reasons for that is that there's been conservancy of wetlands. Scientists started noticing the fact that wetlands were vanishing and pointed out all of the ecological problems this was causing, not just for birds, but for plants, for water itself, the water that we consume and use even. And so he was saying there was this great turn toward conserving wetlands, and that has led to the rebound of these populations of these birds. And he was very heartened by that. And so there we are, we ask a question, we go, what's going on? We get an answer, we kind of figure out why it's happening, and then we do something. But still the problem that we take is we take our answers to be true. And now we've got that solved, that's that, right? And yet, in that same interview, Weidensaul points out that, well, you see, now we're having the same problem with grassland birds. So meadowlarks, for example, are on the decline. So now we're having this problem. And all I gotta say is, what's going on? What's going on? So we can come up with another, well, this is what's going on, and this is why this is what's going on, and then we can do something. But what's going on? What is it that's taking place that is causing all of this suffering and destruction. So difficulty we have with the problem of answering what's going on. We take those answers to be true is that we stop asking what's going on. We stop really interrogating, asking, what is this? What? Or if we do, perhaps we ask a leading question, one that we think we know the answer to. I think about all those times I was a teacher at a community college, first at a university in Wisconsin, and then as a community college teacher. And I would ask these questions that I knew the answers to. And then I would ask my students, and usually they would just clam up, because that's the right thing to do. So somebody already knows the answer, so what's the point of answering it anyhow? And you might be wrong, so you might as well not say anything. There's a term that's used to describe this kind of question. It's called fishing. So you go fishing. You go fishing for an answer. So you ask this question, and you're just waiting for somebody to give you the right answer. And you go, "Yep, that's it." Like I said, it's not a great way to run a classroom. Actually, it's a great way to just have complete silence in the classroom. Unless you have little children, they're a little less self-conscious about that stuff. And it's also just not a great way to engage in thinking, which is when you're in school, that's the job you're doing. You're engaging in thinking. And I would say you could take this out then, beyond that, thinking you know the answer and asking questions that are going to fill that answer. I remember when I was at my master's defense, this oral exam, I had this one professor who was really quite brilliant, but he would ask these incredibly hard questions. First, he would ask the question, and I wouldn't even know what he was asking me. It'd be in plain English, and it would usually be a pretty short question. But what he was I was just like, what? So then first I would not understand what he was asking me. Then I would understand what he was asking me. I go, oh, and then I would really understand what he was asking me, and I go, oh. And at that point, my answer, especially in the kind of panic I would have, would be, I don't know. I don't know. That would sort of be first I'd kind of, fumble around for a while, and then I'd say, I don't know. And at the end of my defense, by which all my professors said I'd done a really good job, and I had thought I made such a muddle of it. This professor actually pulled me aside, and he said, he didn't pull me aside. Actually, what he did is I was to leave the room so they could confer on whether or not I could continue on to get a PhD. So this is like a test to figure out if I could now take the qualifying exams for my PhD. And they asked me to leave the room, and right before they did, this professor said, "Wait, Steve, I just want to say, you said I don't know way too often in your exam." He goes, you can't do that, in this kind of situation. He goes, nobody knows the answers. And I remember that when he said that, I was surprised, because I thought they were asking questions they knew the answers to. I thought that they had like an idea about how I was supposed to answer it. And so I was in that position that I would put my students in, and I was thinking, well, I don't need to answer this. They already know the answer. So when he told me that nobody knows the answer, he goes, I don't know the answer. These guys don't know the answer. I really had to rethink what it was, how it was that I was thinking about what I was doing there. And again, this can apply to our practice, because we can realize that nobody knows, right? So that's something that's very important to know. And so that eventually it got to the point in my classroom, if I could catch myself, I'd try not to fish, but rather I just ask students what they thought about something. It would just be that simple. What did you think about that? I'd still get, I don't know, as an answer, because there's something, they're still sort of put on the spot. And I think there's still that understanding that they think I'm asking them a question I know the answer to. When really what I said is, what do you think? How on earth do I know what they think? I can't possibly say that. So my response when they'd say, I don't know, is, I actually don't care what you know. I care what you think. And I would say that to encourage thinking, because that's what we were doing in that classroom, and to foreground the fact that I valued the students' thinking. But it was also to help students to stop conflating, as I did, thinking and knowing. And so I was trying to get them to see that they're not the same thing. And along with that, then to assuage all of the mixed emotions that show up in a classroom, especially when you're asking questions. And students don't want to appear too smart. They don't appear dumb. It's really a tough spot to be in because you don't want to be right. You don't want to be wrong. So you struggle with that. But again, part of that struggle is they thought I knew. They thought that I was asking, that I was still fishing, because I think it's a technique that a lot of students encounter. So when we think that somebody has the answers, when we think that somebody can just fill in the blanks for us, then we're robbed of the real depth of that question, what's going on? That depth at which the question, what's going on, is an expression of love, as Ronaldo Benson described it. The question from the standpoint of the awakened is not judgmental. So we say what's going on, we might, again, answer, and we might answer in a way that evaluates the situation. But from the standpoint of the awakened, this question is not judgmental, not interested in judgment. And you see various teachings that point that out to us. It's about honesty. It's about what's going on, and it's not about trying to avoid what it is that's going on there. So it's not about what's going on. I'm lying at this moment. I'm telling a lie to circumvent responsibility. Or what I just said was sexist or racist. And then once we realize that, we wish it were other than it is. It's not that. It's not even not to wish you didn't wish it were other than it is, if you did, if you understand what I'm saying there. How we might say, well, I wish I didn't just have said that, or I shouldn't be thinking that. Oop, I shouldn't actually be saying I shouldn't be saying that, that circle. We start to get in that eddy of conceptualization, that eddy of confusion that we can get wrapped up in. But rather, this question is just simply to see what's showing up. What's really showing up. Not our idea of it. However, if it is our idea, it's to see that our idea is what's showing up, if that's what's really showing up. Our idea of what's showing up is to see that. In fact, we must see that, because it's no good to pretend that we're not confused about something, or to pretend that we don't have ideas or beliefs about the world. We're human. Of course we do, right? So it's rather to see that that's what's showing up. If we pretend that we're not confused, if we pretend that we don't have ideas or beliefs about the world, well, then in a way, we're actually doing what Steve Hagen has described as overlaying our experience with conceptions. Because we let those conceptions stand, and they become the filter, because we don't realize they're actually what it is that we're seeing, or what it is that we are taking to be our experience. Instead, we take the conceptions to be true. In this case, we don't even know it. At least if you're aware of the fact that this is an idea you have, or a belief that you have, you can see that that's what it is. And seeing that that's what it is helps you, I would hope. It helps you to see that you can let that go. You don't have to hang on to it. But if you don't see those, then you are hanging on to those conceptions, and you don't even know you're doing it. And those are the kinds of situations where we're doing that. And then somebody points out what we're doing, and then we get defensive and we say, I'm not doing that. Especially when that's very touchy. I find myself doing that too often. I'm not doing that. This isn't really what's going on here. And then I have to stop myself. What am I doing? Why this energy in my body? Why am I engaging in this verbal and mental jujitsu? What's going on there? Why am I immediately jumping in to I'm not doing that. There's a well-known quote that's in Steve's book, The Grand Illusion, and I know Steve has quoted it frequently. Um, it's from Huang Po. I may have even cited it in my last talk. But it's one of those nuggets. It's really gets at something. This Huang Po quote is, "The wise reject what they think, not what they see. The foolish reject what they see, not what they think." So you have the foolish, their experience that they're having, they reject that. And instead it's their ideas about the world that they subscribe to. Whereas the wise actually let go of what they think, and they tend to what it is that they experience, what it is they see. You see, I said let go. Reject seems to be kind of a strong word. But that rejecting what they think is just simply seeing thinking for what it is and not mistaking that for being something that it's not, which again is our tendency to take our conceptualizations as the truth and so overlook what's actually taking place, what it is that's going on. We overlook that. We have answers. We know what's going on, or so we think. And again, this applies to seeing thinking. You see that you're conceptualizing. Don't kid yourself and reject that. Saying that you're not conceptualizing or that you don't conceptualize or somehow getting yourself into that critique. Just see that that's what's showing up. It's as easy as that. You don't have to hang on to that. You don't have to wear those conceptualizations so tightly that they bind you. And all of this might sound complex, complicated, but it's actually really simple. I think of the response that Shunryu Suzuki gave to a clinical psychologist who asked Suzuki a question about consciousness. And Suzuki's answer is so humble and yet so direct to our teachings. He says, "I don't know anything about consciousness. I just try to teach my students how to hear the birds sing." I really love that. This is what this is about. Not about all of the intellectual constructions we can come up with to explain things about consciousness, particularly. Right? It's just I just try to teach my students to hear how the birds sing. However, I have however in capital letters in the notes. What we think Suzuki means by teaching his students how to hear the birds sing, how we take it is not necessarily how Suzuki meant it. Our tendency to take it is often to think that we know what it is to hear the birds sing. In other words, we think, I'm hearing the birds singing right now. And that's not exactly what Suzuki is pointing out to us. Now, granted, it may be true that we don't hear the birds sing because we're so wrapped up in our thoughts. I suspect we've all had experiences like this where you get so caught up in whatever it is that's occupying your mind that just what's going on is completely occluded or it's blocked. I know I've given the example before, but I still remember how startling it was. You sit in a meditation hall and you're sitting on cushions, and in Soto Zen, when we meditate, we sit facing the wall. So you have a wall that's that far away from you, however far, not too far away. And it vanishes sometimes. You get lost in your thoughts and you're not seeing this wall, and it's just right there in front of you. So maybe we're thinking about hearing the bird singing is that we're pulling ourselves out of our heads and we finally can hear the birds sing. And there is something to be said for that. So then if we have that kind of experience, we might think that what Suzuki is talking about is to zero in on those experiences that we overlook. So we take mindfulness as being just carefully looking at everything. We carefully look at it. And I remember early when I was first coming to Dharma Field, hearing a story about a guy who was mindfully unloading his dishwasher. And so he was taking everything out of the dishwasher, and he was being really careful, looking at everything carefully, putting it back into the cupboards, putting everything away into the place it should be. And then his roommate, said, well, those were all dirty dishes. So, he just took all these dirty dishes and mindfully put them back into the cupboard. That's not what we're talking about. It's not about getting caught up in things, about zeroing in on things, about blocking out. If the guy would have looked, he might have seen some telltale stuff on the things he was putting away and thought, wait a minute, are these clean or dirty? That's the question at my house is if we have a dishwasher that's full, it's like, are these dirty or are these full? I almost always ask just to be safe. So that's not what's going on is. That's not what is this? Pay attention. This is not what hearing the birds sing is. It's what we sometimes take it to be. It's really look at this stuff, to zero in on it. But what does it mean to hear the birds sing? You get caught up in that idea again of what it means to hear birds sing. Again, it's just as simple as, well, it's just hearing birds sing. And that's where we stop. That's usually where we stop. So we miss out on the experience. We overlook the awareness of hearing birds singing that is this very experience. Because we're caught up in our ideas about what this experience is. We've turned the experience into hearing birds singing. And we lose sight of, again, the awareness of hearing birds singing that is this very experience. We look at the stuff that shows up, sometimes carefully, sometimes not so carefully, and we take that to be the truth. The stuff that shows up, that's what we take to be the truth. And then, more often than not, we make something of it. We come up with a story, we come up with an explanation. And then we risk believing that, too, as being the truth. And why not? So what we believe and what is true, we take that to be the same thing. So we get caught up in the stuff. We have stories we tell about the stuff, an understanding we have about the stuff. And it might not be understanding in the way that we talk about when we say understanding. So we might think understanding, for example, is something that's conscious and that's intellectual. So what I'm talking about is when we make something of this, that we're thinking about it. We don't necessarily consciously engage in thinking to make something out of what we take to be what's going on. And we don't necessarily do that. It's just what it is that we assume is taking place. It's those assumptions. Assuming is to take something up in a way into the, let's say, take it up into the body. It's to assume it. And those are like what I was talking about earlier, where we might tell ourselves we're not conceptualizing. And we might be doing that in one of those moments where we think, now I'm meditating. So right now, conceptualization has dropped away. I mean, I don't know if we do this. And again, we may not even do it in that way. We might not tell ourselves, now I'm meditating. Conceptualization has dropped away. Instead, there just might be this, I don't know what it is. It might be like a feeling we have that we associate with meditation, that then we associate with what we might think is samadhi. And we're like, okay, now I'm not conceptualizing, and again, you don't even have to say that, but I'm saying it because I don't know how else to convey it, because what's happening there is an assumption or a description of what's going on. That's not necessarily verbalizing what's going on, but it's what's assumed as what's going on. So there's still conceptualization. Again, it sounds complicated. It always sounds complicated because it's actually complicated. It's what it is we're doing. You know, people will ask sometimes, they'll say, so what these teachings are pointing out is that the way that I normally see the world isn't really the way the world is, and I have to go through this, you know, this practice, take up all these teachings in order to see the world the way it really is. Why would reality be like that? And you know, that's a good question. And I would just say, look, right there is your answer. Right there is your answer. In asking that question, how could reality be that way? Well, there you go. Now you're starting to get to the heart of the matter. You're starting to see that the complication isn't the teaching of the awakened. That's just simply, I want my students to hear birds singing, right? That's the teaching, that's all it is. But our minds start to make something more complicated out of it. And then the more we think about it, the more complicated it sounds. If it's complicated, odds are it's not the real deal. Odds are that's just us still spinning out. And we can just come back and say, what's going on? What's going on? So we can do that. We can stop, you know, especially I think moments of crisis, moments when we really feel pain and suffering. Those are the moments when that question comes up. We can ask ourselves, well, that's interesting. Why is it coming up right now? What is it that is ringing out to me at this moment? What is calling out to me at this moment that is drawing my attention in this way that might hurt, in this way that might scare me? You know, what is it? What's going on right now? We can ask that question in the middle of it. Of course, it's hard to do it in the middle of those kinds of conditions. If you're scared or if you're in pain. When you're in pain, your I don't know, your reflex, your tendency is to want to take care of yourself, protect yourself from that. You know, so it's to maybe to recoil, to tense up. When you're afraid, it's to protect some sense of self that you have. So it's hard to ask what's going on, but we do ask it, even in the middle of that. What's going on? And sometimes it shows up, why is this happening to me? Why did it happen to that person? That was a good person. That person took care of themselves. Why is this happening to me? And that's that question, what's going on? And we can stop right there. And rather than do the next thing we do, try to come up with an answer, or to languish, perhaps, in our feelings of pain and misery, we can just stop with the what's going on and really look at the situation. As Suzuki's pointing out, not to just stop at the surface level, you know, not just to stop at the level that we normally think of, or conceive of, or assume what's going on, but to really slow down and settle down and see and hear, and to really experience what's going on. As that question, as that opening up into this moment, as that answering the call or the ringing of the bell that is showing up as what's going on. What is this? What is this? And those are my prepared notes for today. Cindy, go ahead. You had a question or comment. Remember to unmute yourself.
Well, the topic of your talk is interesting to me, because I find that question coming up at different times, and two things that I've noticed about that is that often when that question arises, I'm not quite sure how to say this, but it's when I ask that question, what's going on, I'm not talking about right here, right now. I'm talking about some other situation. During the election last fall, I found myself, checking the news on my phone several times a day with this thought, I have to know what's going on, as if that even reading something was going to tell me there's this vibrant reality, that I'm right here. That's not where my attention was. And then the second thing is often, and I think you address this, but the tendency in asking that question is then to put an answer there that is always going to have substantiality as part of it, right? In the formation of Marvin Gaye's question, what's going on, or the original author of the piece, there are these different people or these different events that are somehow formed, and that question, sometimes it's not coming out of wholeness, it's coming out of differentiation of this person versus that person, or this group versus that group. And so I just wonder, is there a way, I don't know, is there a way, can that question be asked? It makes me think about the question when we looked at Bouchot last fall, that Dogen would just say what, not what's going on, but just what. And I don't know, but yeah, this question comes up, and so I'm interested in what you have to say. Thank you.
Sure. And things show up, right? That is how this thus appears. So, it's coming and going thus, tathagata. That's the nature of reality. So yeah, there's this stuff that seems to be showing up. And then what's going on? And it's a few more words than the what, which is more even than we need to put there. We don't really need to say anything, just I think in a previous talk I talked about, wanting to do the comic book word bubble that has the question mark and the exclamation point, just that interrogative mode. And, as I pointed out too, with that stuff that's showing up, it can be helpful to do our usual intellectual work and try to figure out what is going on in our conventional sense of understanding that term. It can be, but what we want to be aware of is the fact that that is an understanding, that it's conceptualization, that it's intellectual. And that's where I think we really do get tripped up. As you said, it goes as far as to assuming that what we take to be going on. So when we ask that question, we answer it. Now we know what's going on. Well, this is what's going on. So now we put something there, which again can be helpful. Like I said, it can help us, for example, to take actions, as we did with the wetland birds. That's the example that I was showing there. So it can be helpful there. But ultimately, it doesn't really answer the question, in that whatever the problem is there, it's still showing up. It's just now transformed. So now it's grassland birds, So what is it that's going on? And again, we think, well, the thing about wetland birds is about the wetlands, and the thing about the grassland birds is about the grasslands. But now we're not asking what's going on anymore, or to simplify the question, what. So when we encounter things, I would say, first of all, just even look at that impulse to ask what's going on, to figure that out. And right there, you can see that it's not really about that stuff, that it looks like it's about the stuff. But if we just stop and see what is calling to us at that moment, you're going to see that first of all, it's probably your response to it, and then you can really see what that is and what is the motivation behind, I don't know, trying to figure this stuff out, to come up with an explanation to it. So that, yeah, you're right. That question, what, is what I think of as being more open-ended, but ultimately the question is that it's really just what is going on here, and to realize whatever answer we're going to put in there is not really going to be sufficient by its nature of answers like that. This is how we get people debating about stuff, because not everybody, but you can imagine almost anything that we start to answer, there can be different answers to it. There can be different ways of looking at the problem and come to different answers, right? And then mine is the right way to look at it. Mine is the right way to do it. This is the way you really want to take care of this. That's what we've closed off. You can just see so frequently the way that we normally take care of things, that we closed off reality in answering that question, the way that we do. Though we may need to answer the question, but we need to be aware of the limited nature of that answer. We really need to see that. And as you pointed out, Cindy, I mean, this goes back, as you pose the question, to the assumption of what's going on is rooted in there's stuff out there, there are things out there, and there appear to be. So again, it's not totally that you don't ask that question, because they're showing up. But it's how, it's the assumption at the heart of it that drives that need for pursuing answers and explanations. And that comes from the reification of, stuff, the appearances. It's the thingification. It's turning it into stuff. It's making something out of it. I don't know if that helps. Yeah, good. Thanks for the question. Pat, it looked like you were next in line there, so you have a question or comment?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I appreciate your talk, partially because my wife, Allison, had asked if anybody at Dharma Field had spoken to, what's going on right now. So now I can just forward your talk to her. But the question that we were discussing over the dinner table was, we know people who are on to speak about the particulars, on either end of, police support or, this was murder and that kind of thing. And the thing that we struggle with is both of those sides, like you have pointed to, have very strong opinions, to the point where if you don't even couch your words correctly, they kind of jump down your throat, for lack of a better term. And we're stuck in the middle trying to say, how do we bring those two sides together? And I think your talk pointed to it. And I think things we've heard at Dharma Field, Norm says case by case. We can't have particular answers to those types of situations, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that, where there's that great polarization based on what people think is right, and how do you do something to help, or maybe I'm stumbling here a little bit, but I hope you know what I mean.
Yeah, how you negotiate that. Yeah, I'm the same way. I have, a friend who's a retired police officer just from a few years ago. So for him, this stuff is all very real, and feels he's under attack, by culture. And then I have friends who are, activists out on the streets, probably right now, actually, if I understood the last meeting I had with one of my friends, So, but there you're seeing, that way that we have an understanding of what's going on, we have an interpretation of it, and again, it might have some validity. I think about the plight of the wetland birds just as a real obvious example, where there was, a problem that we saw, and there was solutions to it that we took to bring about, so having this kind of intellectual understanding helped bring back the wetland birds. But again, as I was pointing out, very limited, it's such a narrow scope that we couldn't possibly say, this is the reality, this is the truth, because that way of doing things, you're constantly having to figure out what's the next wetland bird that you're going to have to do this with. But anyhow, so to get to your point, that polarization is just, that to me is just a real clear example of how we take ideas, we take a partial way of understanding something and we run with it, and it becomes the truth. And I would say that, for some people, and I'd actually say this is probably pretty common, we identify with the truths that we construct in the world. Right? So when those truths seem to be under attack, it can seem personal. So that makes it even more challenging. But that's where you start to see that's what's happening, that there's identification, that there's solidification of like an ego self that is attached to these particular perspectives, these points of view. So you're right, though, it's case by case. There's no template about how to deal with this, and it can be very difficult because that kind of negotiation is, what it is that we do. That's just this world of this and that. That's the world of muddy water. That's the world we're all in, where you don't know what the right thing is to do. But we do know that we approach it with equanimity, with awareness, with totality, with a understanding of the limits of points of view. As Dogen points out, if you want to wake up, you have to let go of your points of view. You have to let go of that. Letting go of that just means not being bound by them, not being straitjacketed or not being chained by those points of view, seeing them for what they are. And that's hard. Even if you encounter these teachings and you take up this practice, and there's some softening up of that, there's still those moments where, it's just so, and we can be aware, we can see as we do this practice more often, we see this happening in ourselves. And this is really what we can look at as ourselves. It's easy to look at other people and then to say, well, this is what's going on with this person, right? But what's going on, you can almost say with you, but really what's going on right here, and you realize you can't read somebody's mind. You don't really know what they're thinking. You don't know what experience they may be bringing, personal experience they may be bringing to this conversation. So yeah, it's just trying to keep that openness, that is difficult, especially if you feel in the crossfire. What do you do? How do you negotiate that? And I wish I had an answer, but I think that's what, to be honest, figuring that answer out is collectively the wisdom, our wisdom, it's our knowing. So thank you, Pat. And Michael, you have a question or comment?
Actually, it's more of a comment. When you first started your talk and you were talking about the, the trial, I thought, oh boy, maybe I can say something profound as a former prosecutor, and I dealt with police for years. And then it dawned on me that I really didn't care about that. I thought you're talking about Marvin Gaye, and I played What's Going On before all of my constitutional law classes and asked them, can they figure out why I play that music? That's the first thing. And the second thing is, I thought, oh my goodness, 47 years ago, I used to wake up every morning to my roommate playing What's Going On because he was a neighbor of the Gays. He knew Marvin Gaye very well. And so every morning he would play that. And then every night at midnight, I'd hear What's Going On. And I thought, wow, 47 years later, I'm playing Marvin Gaye in a con law class, and I'm attending a Zen talk where somebody's talking about Marvin Gaye. I have a very small mind. That's what's going on for me right now. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That's great. It's a wonderful song. It gives me chills almost every time I hear it. It's one of those songs you can't hear too often. Thanks for sharing. Justin, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I didn't really understand your answer to the previous question. Like, I'm confused about the part, like, it's not really about the issue, but if you have something that you believe and you want to be aware that you have this belief, right? That you believe it and you don't want to hold it, but you still want to do something about it. Like, where does that lead you? Like, through this practice? Like, is the practice just we do nothing about everything? Like, that seems bad. Like, yeah, so it's not so much about like the given issue. It's more like the system that we're using for all issues, right? So that's where I was trying to like pull and I couldn't. I don't know, I'm grasping, I guess.
No, I'm just seeing if I'm just trying to see if I can understand the question. I think I do. And it's sort of if we, it has to do with acting out of beliefs, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And if our understanding of the world is conceptualization, and you don't necessarily have to believe it. This is where belief, we could start to interrogate what it is that belief is. We can understand the world, have an understanding of it, know why we're understanding it, without believing that it is the way things are, and we can even act out of that. But the character of our acting out, the intention of it can be very different. So we don't have to believe our conceptualizations of the world, though they might shape how it is that we're going to act in the world. So again, I pointed out the example, just because it's so stark with the wetland birds. So there was an understanding of what happened. Based on that understanding, some actions were taken. And based on those actions, a problem that was perceived has been corrected. That I would say only temporarily, and only because that one way of looking at it was addressed. And so all of totality comes in here. The problem that's at the heart of that, that problem of what it is that our practice is, to see what's going on and how we overlook what's going on. That problem of overlooking what's going on is still there. As we take a partial or fragmented way of looking at the world as being the truth. So it's not that you do nothing. In fact, you can't do nothing. You have to act in this world. But it's what intention you take those actions up with. What is it you're trying to do? And again, that question, as we keep answering it, we can come up with all kinds of answers. So when we start answering, it can also lead to some difficulties for us, because it can lead to more confusion. Or it can lead to, as I was suggesting in my talk, closing down of asking that question again, what is this? What's going on? And being open to what it is that's showing up, and being open to, say, the suffering of others. So I think, for example, and if I can just draw from the literature for a second, I don't know if do you know the play Othello, Shakespeare's play?
No.
There's a character in the play, you don't really need to know the play, but he's the villain. And he does some pretty bad stuff. He manipulates things to bring down the main character. And people want to know why. Why did you do this? And he comes up with, I don't know, I'm just gonna make up a number, but it's like 12 reasons, you know, as well as because of this, it's because of that, and it's because of this, and it's because of that. It's because of this, it's because of that. And there's so many of them that none of them really could have been what it was that he was doing, right? And so at some point he just says, I've had to say what I've had to say, and I have nothing else to say. And so all of those explanations that he has are just that, you know, they're just explanations. They don't get at what's really going on. They obfuscate, and they further muddy the already muddy waters. So again, and this is only if I understood your question correctly. So do we act? Of course we act, but we have to understand that we're acting from just inherently a limited perspective. The way that we can act at a totality is not to be able to, you know, have an answer that, you know, is the answer that's everything. Because once you have the answer, it's already a thing. So it's already inherently going to be limited. But it's to realize that that answer that you have is limited. And to act out of it with that, what I would say might be that humility of understanding. So that we're not bashing somebody else's head in to try to convince them that the way you perceive the world is the way, or I should say the way you can see the world is the way the world is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Jesse. And I took us a little over. That was kind of a gabby answer, so I'm sorry about how the circumlocucious path that took, Justin. Boy, I kind of circled around, but that's a good question, so thank you. All right, so I think I'll end it here. Thank you all for being here this week.